There's nothing quite like sculpting something from scratch. But you'll need a good grasp of the tools to avoid coming unstuck. So let's get down to it. Maybe Cuthbert will learn something too. Go to the Assembly menu. Press the square button to open it if it's closed, and select the Modes menu with the X button. Select Sculpt Mode with X. Its icon has some 3D shapes on it. Every time you enter Sculpt Mode from the Modes menu, a new sculpture will be created. You'll also notice that when you're in Sculpt Mode, everything outside the sculpture will be blurred and greyed out. This is to help you focus on what you're creating. You can adjust visual feedback in your preferences, which you can find in the Options menu. When you first enter Sculpt Mode, the Shapes menu will open automatically and the Smear Shape tool will be equipped to your imp. Try smearing a shape now by holding R2 and moving your imp around. Now that's out of your system, undo all of it by using the left directional button. By using this tool, we'll help Connie get across the first gap. Move your view a bit closer to the action, looking side on at the space between the platforms. Make sure you can see the platforms and that your imp can reach them. We want to build an organic structure for Connie to walk on, so let's pick an appropriate shape. Select one from the Shapes menu. And you'll see it on the end of your imp. Use the up and down directional buttons to scale it to an appropriate size. While you have a shape on your imp, you can use the grab cam to zoom in and out. Just hold R1 and use the left stick. Now position your imp next to the platform on one side of the gap. Then hold down R2 and use the motion sensor function or the left stick to smear your shape in the gap so that Connie can walk on it. If you want to have another go at it, just undo using the left directional button. Feel free to press and let go of R2 as many times as you want. Each press will create a new edit within your sculpture. Bear in mind that all the edits you make are part of a single sculpture, even if they aren't connected. This means that in assembly mode, they'll behave like a single object. Why not try out different shapes to see what works best? Try holding L2 as you sculpt and use the left and right sticks to rotate the shape. Maybe try making something like a rock formation or a tree trunk. The cool thing is, sculptures are automatically physical, so they can be walked on by puppets like Connie immediately. When you want to try it out, switch to Play mode in the Options menu and get Connie to walk around on your sculpture. When you're happy to move on, go back to Edit mode and proceed to the next step. What happens when we want to edit an existing sculpture rather than start a new one? Let's investigate. When we went into play mode, we were taken out of sculpt mode. When you're in assembly mode, scope back into your sculpture. Hover over it with your imp, hold L1 and press X. It's just like scoping into a group. Have a go at it now. Now we're here, let's try editing the shapes you've already made. To move or rotate shapes, unequip the Smear Shape tool by pressing circle. This automatically equips the Move tool. You might notice most of the movement controls in Sculpt mode are the same as in Assembly mode. Grab and move shapes with R2, rotate them using L2 and the sticks or the touchpad. You can hold L1 and move with R2 to clone your shapes or scale them with the up and down buttons. You can even repeat clone. But unlike assembly mode, you can't select things with X in sculpt mode. Now try moving, rotating, and scaling your individual shapes. If you want to smear some more shapes, just go to the Shapes menu and select a shape to sculpt with. Selecting a shape will automatically equip the last sculpting tool you used. Now you can play around at sculpting with different shapes. Don't forget that you can undo and redo at any time. If you accidentally scope out, you can scope back into your sculpture by hovering over it with your imp and pressing L1 and X. In the next step, I'll show you how to colour your sculpture. You've probably noticed by now that all your sculptures are orangey brown, like clay. That's the default colour, but you can sculpt with any colour you like. If you're in assembly mode, hover over your sculpture with your imp, then hold L1 and press X to scope back into it. Next, head to the Colours section in the Sculpt menu and press X over a colour group to see the different shades. Choose a colour, any one you like. And as if by magic, the shape on your imp is now the colour you chose. Any new shapes you make will be that colour, but the old shapes are still brown. Luckily, we can also colour shapes after we've created them, using the Spray Paint tool. Go to the Sculpt menu and open the Tools section with X. Then select the Spray Paint tool, which has a spray can icon. Now your imp will have an outline of the current shape on its tip. Intersect the shape with your sculpture and you'll see the spray paint colour appear on it. Hold R2 to apply the spray paint to the shapes. You can try out different colours and shapes to completely change the look of your sculpture. If you want to make it easier to keep your imp on the surface of the sculpture, you can use the Surface Snap guide. You can find Surface Snap in the Sculpt Guides menu. Select it with X to turn it on. There's a guide. Guides menu in every mode, though not all guides are available everywhere. You can also change the finish of your sculpture using the Finishes menu. The Coat, Style and Effects tutorial has more on finishes if you're curious. By now, you should have an organic-looking form, and it'll be whatever colour your imagination conjured up. If you switched on Surface Snap, switch it off in the Guides menu before continuing. Just select the button with X to turn it off. Then, when you're ready, proceed to the next step. All these smeared shapes are creating one single sculpture, even if there's space between them. But you can also use the smear tool to remove from the sculpture instead of adding to it. To do that, we need to set the tool to subtract. Scope into your sculpture if you haven't already with L1 and X. When the Smear Shape tool is equipped to your imp, you can press the triangle button to make it subtract. You'll notice that your imp turns into an outline. The shape on your imp becomes an outline too. You can now use the Smear tool to cut into your sculpture. Try using different shapes to see what effect they have. For a really cool effect, try subtracting with a different coloured shape on your imp. How good is that? You can switch the tool between Add and Subtract by pressing the triangle button. Why not play around with the tools a bit and try to make a dramatic or interesting looking form? When you're happy with its shape, go into play mode and see if you can get Connie across it. If you need to edit it, just come back to edit mode via the options menu. Don't forget to scope back into your sculpture using L1 and X. When Connie has successfully crossed the first gap in play mode, switch back to edit mode, then go to the next step. Smearing shapes can be a messy business. Sometimes you just want to create neat sculptures. Luckily, there are ways to do that. So go to the Assembly menu and select Sculpt in the Modes menu. This will create a new sculpture. Now let's practice sculpting an architectural structure over the second gap. To help us build a neater bridge, open the Guides section of the Sculpt menu. In Guides, switch on Grid Snap by pressing X over it. You'll see a number appear next to the button. That's how big the grid squares will be. You'll notice the white dotted grid in the scene. The spacing of the dots shows the tightness of the grid. They will change orientation depending on your point of view. We'll leave it on the default setting for now. You can experiment with it later. Now try making a colourful sculpture using the Smear and Move tools and the Colours menu. This'll just be a practice one, so don't spend too long on it. We'll delete it and make an even better one in a minute. You'll notice that it's much easier to keep your shapes neat and straight this time. That's because Grid Snap is active. It makes your tools and objects snap to the grid. It also helps you rotate precisely. Try it out using L2 or the touchpad. With Grid Snap on, objects rotate 45 degrees at a time. You can rotate the shape on the end of your imp before you stamp it, or use the Move tool to rotate shapes that are already placed. When you're comfortable sculpting with Grid Snap, continue to the next step. If we want to make a super neat bridge, there's another guide we can use. If you're still in sculpt mode, scope out of it with L1 and circle. Once you're in assembly mode, delete your sculpture with triangle. Go to the Modes menu. Click the Sculpt Mode button to start a new sculpture. Now we're in sculpt mode, the Guides menu will have different options. Open the Guides menu and switch on the Mirror Guide. Don't worry about the two additional options. Let's investigate them later. Also, check the Grid Snap is still turned on. Now select the Smear tool in your chosen color and shape. The Mirror Guide will always center on the first shape you make. That's why we started a new sculpture. Now, move your view so you can see all of the second gap, and your imp can reach it. If you need to, use the grab cam to zoom out a little from the shape on your imp. Now stamp your first shape right in the center of the gap to enable the Mirror Guide. Then smear your shape from the center over to the edge of the gap where it meets the platform. You'll see that your sculpt is mirrored.